But Drew, let's get the hammer out and let's go to the over/under. This is something that we're going to enjoy a lot, and I'm glad we're going to keep doing this. But we're going to do the over/under regular season win totals for the top 5 teams preseason, according to our own Brad Crawford. He did a story on this not too long ago. So if we will find a way to get that to you on 24/7 Sports. But Drew, we're going to start with Alabama, the number 1 ranked team here in the preseason. According to Brad Crawford, their win total over/under is 11. And I'll start, Drew. I'm going to take that hammer out. I'm going to smash this. I see a perfect season for Alabama. Everything they have coming back, the Heisman winner, Bryce Young, Will Anderson, arguably the best player in the country, the best defensive player in the country. Jordan Battle is back as well. This team, to me, is a team on a mission, and you heard it. I mean, you talked about Nick Saban talking about, hey, last year was a rebuilding year with an appearance in the national championship. So, to me, you start to kind of get the hints throughout the offseason. I think Alabama is going to be a very focused team. I have them going undefeated with a 12-0 spotless record in the regular season.
Yeah, now just to clarify, this is regular season, right? So they got 12 games. You're saying they're going to win 11 or get to 12. And I'm going to agree with you. I'm going over as well. Pete Golding, the defensive coordinator for the Crimson Tide, he had an interesting comment a few days ago, said that Alabama, for the first time, he feels like he has leaders at all 3 levels of his defense. So the defensive line, linebackers, and then obviously in that secondary. That's something that sticks with me. I've also heard this offseason that we always talk about Will Anderson, the all-world, the edge rusher. I had someone in that building tell me that they think Dallas Turner could have more sacks this season than Will Anderson. That might be a product of teams playing Will Anderson one way, but Dallas Turner, I expect a big step from him. And, Cooper, one other thing I was thinking about, having a conversation with some of my buddies about Heisman futures, and, I'm like, I don't really like anything on the board. Bryce Young, I don't like Jahmyr Gibbs. Why isn't there an Alabama wide receiver? I can't get odds on Ja'Cory Brooks to win the Heisman. I'm not campaigning for it, but I think that's worth a flyer. I mean, someone's got to catch the ball from Bryce Young. So I'm all in. I think 12 wins. I think the schedule sets up nicely, and the whole world will be watching October 8th when Texas A&M and them go to battle.
Let's go to Ohio State now. Now to Big Ten country. The over/under for them 11. And our producer Jesse changed the over/under win total before the show, so I kind of went back and forth on this one a little bit. But I'm going to say they're in a push. I have them at 11-1 right now. But you look at Ohio State's schedule and how it sets up for them. It's pretty favorable. The first 5 games at home in Columbus, and then you got to go on the road at Michigan State. I think they'll be ready for that one. Then you get a bye. You got Iowa, and then at Penn State. I think that Penn State game is the one that I have circled. If there was going to be a potential trip up for Ohio State and the Buckeyes, that's where it would be. But C.J. Stroud coming back, Trevion Henderson, I think he's going to be even better in year 2. Jackson Smith and Najigba. We've talked a lot about the receivers, Emeka Egbuka being one of them. There's no shortage of firepower on the offensive side of the ball. But Drew, I know this is what you brought up earlier in the show. What are they going to look like defensively? I think they're going to be more experienced. I think they're going to be able to hold it together. I say 11-1 for the Buckeyes in the regular season.
So I'm actually going under here, and I'm sure that's going to raise some eyebrows. And look, Ohio State defensive side of the ball, that has been an issue recently. They go and bring in Jim Knowles to be the defensive coordinator. And again, he's coming in with a new system. I was looking at that 2 deep, and yes, there's some talent. They're dealing with some injuries right now. And I think they're getting some guys like Lathan Ransom back. I believe he was practicing this week. I read that somewhere, or maybe it was on Bucknuts. I just worry about it. The pass defense, number 122 in the country 2 years ago. This past season, they were 96th in the country. So, I think the schedule, they face some talented quarterbacks, maybe not talented, but some quarterbacks that can win some games. Sean Clifford, that Penn State game, Tua's brother at Maryland, and then Michigan at the end, whether that's J.J. McCarthy or whatnot. So I have them at 10-2 right now. I know that's going to have some people a little bit upset, but I do think that there are some potential speed bumps on that schedule.
Georgia now 11 wins over under. I'm going to let you take the first crack at this one.
Yeah, I'm going over here. Georgia, the 15 players selected NFL record in the most recent NFL draft. I just look at this schedule, and it just doesn't seem to be all that difficult. Yes, Oregon, they faced them in Atlanta week 1, but man, is Kentucky the hardest road game on here? I guess South Carolina. I just think this sets up where Georgia can kind of go in cruise control under Stetson Bennett. And I'll say this, everyone's probably going to ask about all the talent they lost on the defensive side of the ball, but man, it seems like like me and you are always hyping up what they're bringing in. And when I was talking with some people in Nashville, the name that kept coming up was Mykel Williams, the former 5-star defensive end. He's on campus, and there's reason to believe he's potentially going to play as a freshman. And, Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Keely Ringo, I mean, those are all former 5-star prospects. And then obviously on the offensive side of the ball, you got Brock Bowers. So I don't expect Georgia to take any type of step back. Give me them 11-1. I think they could push, but I lean to the over.
I just think back to the former record of players drafted before Georgia this past year at 15. That was LSU in 2019, their national championship team. And listen, I'm not putting Ed Orgeron in the same breath of Kirby Smart. I'm not getting ready to do that. But I went back and I looked at the schedule a little bit. The two games that kind of stick out to me are week 3 at South Carolina. I think Spencer Rattler, Austin Stogner, you got a confident team there. And if that's a night game, that's going to be a game. That is one of the most difficult places in the country to play. I think South Carolina will be ready to roll for that one. But this Florida game, that has always just been a very interesting game to me. It's always had this very clunky feel. Even when there's been a favorite on either side of it, that game has just a little bit of unexpectedness to it. So I got that one circled as well. Now let's go to another team, and that will be number 4, Clemson. And this is going to be a really interesting one. We've talked a lot about DJ Uiagalelei. Cade Klubnik, one of the best quarterbacks in the country last cycle in the class of 2022. Last year, I think we've talked about it plenty. DJ Uiagalelei was not the only factor in terms of Clemson's struggles, if you want to call it that. There are a lot of issues up front. The receiving core was definitely a lot of room for improvement. But Drew, they're over/under win total at 10.5 right now. I'd be interested to see what you think on this one.
I'm going under here, and I think it's a difficult schedule for Clemson. I mean, we'll get into a second the personnel and the coaching, but at Wake Forest, I mean, that's week 4. Wake Forest returns a ton of talent, and you go to NC State. Look at the back end as well at Notre Dame, Louisville, Miami, and improved South Carolina schedule. So I see some losses here for Clemson, who probably has the top defensive line in the country and one of the nation's best linebackers right behind them in Trent Simpson. Look, I like a lot of pieces that Clemson has across the board, but I think depth is certainly a concern. And then let's not forget, he lost both of his coordinators. His defensive coordinator and his offense coordinator are no longer at Clemson. I think that could play a factor. I do agree with you, and I'm sure you're going to bring this up. Cade Klubnik, the former 5-star quarterback who me and you love, talked about him potentially playing as a true freshman. I don't think you would be surprised if he got some action in 2022, correct?
Yeah, let's make a little side bet here, Drew, because that's what this show is all about. So Cade Klubnik, if you were a betting man, you're saying, okay, where does Cade Klubnik potentially get his first start? And you look at the schedule, you look at Georgia Tech, Furman, Louisiana Tech. And I look back and went all the way back to 2018 when Trevor Lawrence was a freshman. And certainly some of it had to do with Kelly Bryant suffering an injury earlier in the season. But Trevor Lawrence was getting some run. I think Dabo Swinney at that point knew he had something there, and he wanted to pull the curtain back and kind of see if it was real and if it would stand the test of time. So I kind of look at this similarly. You got Furman, Louisiana Tech earlier on the schedule. I would not be surprised by week 3 if we got a pretty good idea of where this conversation is shaping it up. And then I think by week 5, heading into week 6 at Boston College, I think you're going to have a pretty good idea of who the starter is going to be for the rest of the season when you're going into week 6 on the road against Jeff Hafley.
Okay, so you're going over under 6 is am I right here?
I would say over under, let's call it 4.5. So at Wake Forest.
I'm going over because I think it'll come with that bye week. If you go back to that schedule, I could see them trading back and forth quarterbacks. I mean, I think Dabo, if he can, he's going to do it earlier. But that bye week, look, after the Syracuse game, before that Notre Dame game, and I talked about that 4-game stretch at the end. You go up to South Bend to face the Irish. A hungry Louisville team comes to town after that. And then Miami's going to be fired up, and that leads right into your game against your rival, South Carolina. So, I mean, I don't think in the ideal world it goes that long, but by the bye week, I think Cade might have separated himself if that is the case, and that would make perfect sense as to when to do it.
Yeah, I'm going to go under as well on Clemson. I think they'll drop one within the first 6 weeks, whether that's Wake Forest, NC State, or Boston College. And you talked about that last 4-game stretch right there. Notre Dame, Louisville, Miami, South Carolina. I mean, those teams are very much improved. At Notre Dame is kind of the game that I got circled. I think Miami, Mario Cristobal every year loves being the underdog I got that game circled as well. So I'm going to go under. Let's round this out with Texas A&M and Jimbo Fisher, 8-4 season last year. A lot of expectations coming in with a historic recruiting class. The talent, a lot of these freshmen are going to be leaned on to contribute early. They're over under right now, 8.5 wins for the regular season. Which way are you leaning on the Aggies?
I'm leaning under, and again, that's probably one that's going to surprise people. But man, this schedule is certainly not easy. I mean, App State is one of your out of conference games. App State has had Power 5 teams numbers as of late. I mean, last year against Miami, they only lost by 2 points. A few years ago, they took Penn State to double overtime on the road. And then obviously we know what they did against Michigan years and years ago. I just look at the schedule and it's difficult. I mean, we don't know who's going to be under center for the Aggies. And yes, I think you brought it up. I mean, a lot of that 2022 recruiting class is going to be leaned on to play valuable, meaningful snaps. And to me, this just feels like a team that's probably a year away from getting where they want to be, from being 10-2, from being 11-1. And, Arkansas, that's a team that beat Texas A&M last year. Miami, that's going to be a monster game, 9 p.m. kickoff at Kyle Field. And then you got to go to Alabama at South Carolina. So I don't think the schedule sets up very well for Texas A&M. I mean, this is as difficult of a schedule as it can get.
I love A&M and the pieces that they have, but ultimately for me, this comes down to quarterback play. I don't know where you're going to get that from, whether that's Haynes King or Max Johnson. I think Johnson was a little bit more inconsistent last year. I don't blame him with the issues that LSU had under Ed Orgeron last year in Baton Rouge. I think that was a difficult position for him to be in. But you talk about that schedule, Drew, and you start looking at it. I mean, App State, Miami, and then Arkansas in Jerry World in Dallas. And I think Arkansas is going to be a very difficult out this season as well. At Mississippi State, a team they lost to. I think Alabama has the Aggies zeroed. We all know about that offseason talk between Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher. And then here's the other one, at USC. To me, USC is either going to get Georgia or Texas A&M. I'm going to put my money on Texas A&M. And then look at this stretch here. Ole Miss, Florida, at Auburn. You got UMass, and then you got LSU. LSU has been very difficult for Texas A&M to handle. And you talk about LSU as a team with talent. I know there's not these high, lofty expectations right now, but I can see them being an 8 to 9 win team in the SEC West that by that point in December, I think they're going to be playing their best football, late November. So Texas A&M, as exciting as the talk is surrounding their program right now with all the talent that they have on their roster, you're like, okay, 8.5 win total. I'm going under, both you and I. So it's going to be interesting to see this play out and if they can exceed expectations. It also wouldn't surprise me, and this might sound like an out here, that if they're a double-digit win team, and also a factor maybe when it comes to the CFP as well. So we'll see. I mean, that is how high the ceiling is for Texas A&M and how low the floor can be at the same time. So we'll see what we get from Texas A&M and Jimbo Fisher and the Aggies come this fall.